and your wisdom that we need for the living of these days. We ask that you fill our hearts with your presence, that we may be blessed by this time together. And we ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All righty, so we are dealing with the new life, and the very first sentence struck me, and I guess I knew it, but it never really registered. And the very first sentence in the introduction says that in the early church, everyone was a convert, which makes sense. It's a new church, so there's nobody who can come and say, I want to transfer my membership from the Christian church down the street, because there were no Christian churches. So everyone who was coming into this new community of faith was a convert from Judaism or some pagan religion, Greek philosophers, things of that nature. And so, again, they had to figure out who they were and how they were going to interact with each other. And they put in the second paragraph, the questions that they were asking. Do we continue to practice the Jewish law? If we do not follow the law, what does guide our actions? Does Christ's imminent return make our concerns inconsequential anyways? Hey, Melissa, thank you for joining us. And we decided we were going to use the AC up here. And I was telling them I am not a summer person. Oh, I think I've told you, my friends down in Florida want me to retire there. No way.
That's where we're going.
I know you are, but it's cooler down there than it is up here.
Yeah.
It was 15 degrees cooler down there yesterday than it was up here. And Florida is the worst place to be a minister.
Oh, really?
You didn't know that?
No, why?
It is absolutely the worst place, hardest place to be a minister. Because in the winter it's so beautiful, heaven doesn't interest them, and in the summer it's so hot, hell doesn't scare them.
Okay.
All righty. So, preparing for the search. We probably will spend some time on the letter of James this evening. And there are some that say that James contradicts Paul, because Paul was all about salvation through faith, and James is all about works and good deeds. And so James has that famous saying, show me your faith apart from your works, and he says, you can't do it. I'll show you my faith by my works. And so, there are those who say they're contradicting each other. I don't believe they are. I think they're basically talking about two sides of the same coin. Faith on one side, works on the other. Okay, and Timothy, Second Timothy, that's one of the pastoral epistles. So Paul wrote letters to Christian communities, and that's Rome. Well, Romans was more of an introduction, but Corinthians, Ephesians, Colossians, Galatians, Thessalonians, those are known as general epistles, letters to churches. But Paul also wrote some letters to some individuals, and that's where you get First and Second Timothy, Titus, Philemon, and then there's some other personal letters that were written by others, like First and Second Peter, First, Second, Third John. Okay, before I go any further, does anyone have any specific questions about any of the readings that perplexed you? Yes.
We're not there yet, but
That's okay.
But in First Peter, when it's talking about the living hope, he writes to be distinctive and living in the spirit by the scriptures, distinguished from non-believers and resisting evil, gaining self-control by the sanctifying work of the spirit. You know what sanctifying is, because I looked it up.
Yep. All right, so let me get there. So this is First Peter,
First Peter,
and what verse? So it's verses 3 through 9, and then 13 through 22. 83 through 9. And then it picks up on 13.
I think I went on too far, because now that I'm looking at it, I think I was at 15.
Oh, okay, that's no, 15 was one of the ones we had to read. Be holy in your conscience.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yep, you should be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile, knowing that you were ransomed from the feudal ways inherited by your forefathers. Is that it?
Are you reading First Peter?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You're not in Second Peter.
No, I'm in First Peter, because it was, on the commentary, it was saying, how holy can we get?
Oh, okay. So you're focusing on the part about you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Right.
Yep.
And gaining self-control, and,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess I didn't understand when they're talking about,
This,
I guess it's verse 2, the sanctifying of this. Yes, so verse 2.
okay.
We have chosen according to the following of.
Mm-hmm. The foreknowledge of God the Father and the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ and for sprinkling with his blood.
Does the sanctifying work of the Spirit to glorify God? Is that-
So, and I apologize, these allergies are, so justification means how are we put in right relationship with God? Because we've all gone astray. And of course, as we've talked about it, as we've made our way through the Christian scriptures, Paul says we are justified, put in right relationship with God through the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross. Okay. And so it's 100% grace. Sanctification then is basically what happens after you've been justified. Okay. And the Methodists call it striving for perfection. We never really get there fully, but sanctification is becoming more holy and living a life that is holy and pleasing to God. And so that's what he's talking about there. The whole part about you shall be holy as I, the Lord your God, am holy. And in one sense that seems a little overwhelming. I mean, how can we possibly be holy like God is? And I think in one of the Gospels it says you shall be perfect even as your heavenly Father is perfect. And I don't know about you, but if that means what it says on the face value, that's pretty discouraging, because I ain't never going to do it. And one of the best interpretations I heard about it, and some of you will remember Hal Folleen. And in his book, Life is for Living, his collection of his sermons, and he has one sermon in there called In Memory of Edna Farrell, and who we have an Edna Farrell Fund that is used to help people in the church who are in need. And it was established after Edna Farrell passed away. And she was just, I never met her. She passed away before I came, but everybody's told me she was just a gentle, dear soul. And I think she had a stroke later in life, and she would struggle for words and everything. And so at her funeral, Hal gave a eulogy, and he said, Edna wasn't the best at this. She wasn't the best at that. He talked about one time after she had her stroke, she and her husband lit the Advent candle, and she couldn't find the right words, and she just stood there and cried.
Right, that I have a vivid memory
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
She sobbed. She was
Yeah,
just
yeah,
shaking like
yep.
this, and she, do you remember that? And he's going,
Yeah.
"Hey, then calm down."
Yeah. So, so Hal's talking about that, and he said Edna wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
She was perfect at being Edna. And that just hit me, and there's, in Greek philosophy, there's a term called teleological, okay? And teleological means a purpose, an end that you're striving toward, okay? And so what teleological would say is, does this thing meet the purpose for which it was created? So, for example, theologically speaking, okay, a perfect set of sunglasses isn't necessarily the one that costs $500. The purpose of sunglasses is to protect your eyes from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So teleologically speaking, the perfect pair of sunglasses is the one that does the best job of doing what it was created for. And that's true for us too. You know, are we the best version of who we were created to be? And I think that's what it means when it says, you know, be holy, be perfect as God is perfect. Are you being the best version of you that's possible? Okay. And you know, when I look at it that way, it puts a different spin on it. And then instead of saying, oh, I might as well throw in the towel right now because I'm not going to be as holy as God and I'm not going to be perfect like God. But I do have a chance of being the best me that can be. Yep. Yep. Yes, you're very welcome. Any other passages, whatnot that,
I just had a
sure,
couple questions. about
okay.
Romans 12.
Romans 12, let me,
Just a couple things I just didn't quite.
okay, so that
Just
was,
curious.
yep, and let me get over there. Yeah, I made several notes there, so we'll see what you have as a question. Okay, fire away.
All right, so verse 13.
Verse 13. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality.
It was Romans 12. Yeah, contribute to the needs of the saints.
Yep,
What?
what's he referring to?
Yeah.
So essentially, what happened is in the early history of the church, the Jews had rebelled and Rome had severely put it down. And so when Paul talks about contributing to the needs of the saints, as he was going around establishing churches, he was encouraging them to take up special offerings to help the Christians in Jerusalem who were suffering and in terrible need. In fact, there's one, I think, a couple of weeks ago where Paul was, I wish I could remember, maybe it was the Ephesians, and Paul basically says, you know, I've been bragging to everyone about how you already have your offering ready, and he's, I'm just reminding you because I'm on my way there with Timothy or someone, and you know, I don't want to get there and you'll be empty-handed because it's going to make me look bad, not to mention yourself. Yep, so that's what the
So the
collection,
saints are, they're just referencing the people.
the Christians in Jerusalem. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
And then verse 20,
20.
to the contrary, if your enemy.
I knew this was going to come up. Go ahead. I just don't want to presume.
I get like if he's
Yeah.
you know, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink.
Yeah.
For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head.
Yeah,
That-
I knew that was coming. So that sounds pretty vindictive, doesn't it? You know,
Well, yeah, because I mean, the next line is do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good."
exactly. And
So
if you're
that
talking
doesn't
about
seem like
burning coals on someone's head, isn't that kind of evil? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, and I will confess that that bothered me once upon a time, and I did some research on it. And what Paul is basically saying here is kill him with kindness. And in doing that, increases the chances that he's best person is going to be feel really bad about the way that they've been treating you.
So it's a reference to like how they'll be.
Right. It isn't an act of punishment. It's basically he's saying kill him with kindness. And, you know, in doing that, you know, maybe he'll understand, you know, that the way he's been treating you isn't the way he really wants to be.
Right.
Yeah. No, I hear with, you know, there's another passage that's similar to that in Paul's letter. And in one of the letters, he talks about somebody who is living amongst you in sin, some sort of immorality. We don't know what it was. And Paul basically says, kick him out of the church and consign him to Satan.
Right.
Now, that sounds very judgmental. But what Paul is really saying there is, you know, what this person may need is a bit of tough love. You know, kick him out, And hope, after you've tried everything, if it doesn't work, kick him out. And, you know, you still love him, but hopefully that will shock him to his senses and he'll turn his life around. Yep, but, yep, that's a very good question, and it is one that I get quite a bit on that very, and not surprisingly, because at face value, it sounds,
It sounds awful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
My version says by doing so, you would make him burn with shame.
Ooh,
Oh. Yeah, not really.
yeah, what's your translation again?
The new, whatever it is here, today's English.
Oh, yeah, you will, yeah, say it again, you will what?
Burn with shame.
Yeah. Now make him burn with.
Make
shame.
him burn with shame,
Not-
okay, so
really
it puts a very
Yeah,
different
yeah.
perspective on it, yeah. Yep, very good, other questions? Since we're in Romans, look at verse 2. Okay. We're in Romans chapter 12. Okay, and by the way, my translation, every time there's the word brothers, I get a notation on the bottom, it says, or brothers and sisters. The word that's being used there is non-gender specific, it's inclusive. Okay, so verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Okay, that you do what is the will of God, it will be good and acceptable and perfect. And, you know, from my own way of thinking, that is the biggest mistake that mainline Protestant churches have made over the last 30, 40 years. You know, Paul is saying, do not be conformed to this world. Paul's basically saying, you know what, like it or not, you're called to be different. You know, out there in the so-called real world, it says, this is what you do. But you know what, you're not called to conform to this world. You're called to be different. And sadly, what I think a lot of churches have done is they have taught people to be secular Christians. In other words, to let their Christianity, their faith tag along in their day-to-day life, rather than letting the faith determine and define their day-to-day life. You know, many years ago, we had a student minister, some of you will remember Martha Leahy. And I will never forget 1 week in supervision, we'd have weekly supervisions with the student ministers. And Martha shocked me. And she said, you people are so much more religious than I'm used to. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you talk about things like the cross and the atonement and things like that. And I said, you don't talk about that in your church? She said, no, not really. And I'm thinking to myself, no wonder we're having such a difficult time in churches. We're taught to be different.
Yeah.
Okay, we're taught to say, you know what, everybody is doing this, but I'm sorry, I can't go along with the crowd. Any of you ever see the movie Chariots of Fire?
Yes.
Oh, I love that movie. Love that movie. It's been tweaked a little bit. So it's, you know, they always say that based upon a true story. They don't say true story because they tweak it a little to make it a little more dramatic. But the basic plot of that story is true. It's about a Scottish missionary by the name of Eric Liddell, and he competes in the Olympics. And he forgoes a race because it's on Sunday, and he won't, you know, run or compete on the Sabbath. And so he loses his, you know, dream of winning a gold medal. He then wins a gold medal in another, you know, event. But, you know, I've always liked that because it's, you know, I'm sorry, you know, everybody says, yeah, let's go do this. But sometimes as a person of faith, you know, sorry, I can't go along with you on that. No, you don't do it in a way that says, boy, are you all going to regret this when we come to this, you know, the final judgment. But just says, you know, as you have that plaque, you know, as for me and my house, we will worship the Lord, you know, and that's what we are called to be different sometimes. And we have done sad job of teaching people to be what I call secular Christians, you know, in other words, conform to the world and keep your faith kind of in your pocket and don't really bring it out. And yeah, yep, yes.
I'm just curious to know from your perspective, like, where do we draw the line? Because.
On what?
On how to be not of the world, but be in the world.
Yes.
So I used to be in a church where women, we couldn't wear makeup. We
Yep.
couldn't wear long hair, we had to wear hats, dresses at all times. You
Mm-hmm.
don't adorn yourself
Mm-hmm.
because you don't wanna cause attention to yourself in
Yeah.
that way. And it was very to the letter.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, you pretty much got scanned as you came in, and you were either,
Yep.
you know,
That's.
but it was a little cookie cutter in that.
Yeah.
so-
Oh yeah. And you know what? It's interesting you should say that, because one of the things that I have said many times is I don't want to be a part of a faith community that produces cookie cutter Christians, where everybody comes out exactly the same. Okay. Because guess what? We're not all exactly the same. And unfortunately, the times that we're living in a lot of instances, in too many instances, not being or being different is a sin, you know? This is why I really liked the quote that I used in the sermon last Sunday from Abraham Lincoln,
Oh, yeah.
where he was talking to a friend and he said, I really don't like that man. I must get to know him better. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, yeah.
In other words, instead of saying, you know, I'm not going to have anything to do with him,
Yeah.
I'm going to get to know him better.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's one of the problems. And look, the Christian faith is all about a story. And the scriptures are all about stories. And we need to do a better job of sharing our stories, but letting others share their stories with us. Because then, only then can we get to really know and respect one another. The problem with tolerance today, it drives me crazy, is there's this sense that tolerance means dumbing everything down to the lowest common denominator so that no one is offended. Okay. Now, that to me isn't tolerance. I'll give you an example. Every year, the Chamber of Commerce has a holiday tree lighting, and you know what? They can call it what they want. It's their event, okay? But for me, it's a Christmas tree, okay? And people will say, well, you know, why should you get all offended, you know, because it's called a holiday tree? And, you know, what my response is, so does that mean, so now, and I'm glad to see it on the common, now they have a Hanukkah menorah, okay? So does that mean that we should call the menorah a candlestick?
Yeah.
You know, tolerance for me is letting you be fully who you are and you letting me be fully who I am. And we talk to each other and we get to understand and know each other and respect each other. It doesn't mean that we have to always agree with one another, but we grow and we learn to respect one another. And that's not happening these days. It really isn't. And, you know, that's why, you know, I've been saying over and over again, you know, we need to let people know that in our faith, it's not a sin to be different. At least in my faith, it isn't a sin to be different. And with all of the nastiness and the negativity and the name calling, I believe that people are desperate for, you know, what we can offer. But we are called to be, and you use this phrase, we are called to be in the world, but not of it. Okay. In a sense, it's like the game of Monopoly. Okay, you get to, you know, jail, you know, just passing through. That's when it comes to life, that's true for all of us. We're just passing through. You know? That's why I always say, you know, every year when the council terms are up, you know, I say, oh, yeah, you all get to pass through jail. I'm here for good. Oh yeah, look at verse 19. and this kind of gets back to what you were saying in same Romans 12. And this is kind of gets back to what you were getting at, Melissa. Beloved, never avenge yourself, believe it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. A little harsh. Paul can have an edge to him sometimes. But
But I mean, I love that because it's like, who are we to judge?
Yes.
Like you said,
Yeah.
you know.
right, yeah. Do I mean that, I'm gonna take that to say God's up there saying, boy, I can't wait to get a hold of this one. But you're right, let God judge, This is a little tongue in cheek, but there's a cute little variation on that verse, and sometimes somebody does something that makes you so mad, and you let God handle it. So the variation on this verse is, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, but is it okay if I watch? And verse 15 in that chapter, I think is a summary of what a community of faith is all about. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. And I said, a few weeks ago in a sermon, that's why I love doing the prayers of the faithful the way we do now. The prayers of the faithful always used to be the hardest part of the service for me. I dreaded it. Coming up with a prayer every week, but I always felt like it was the designated prayer. Baseball has the designated hitter. I felt like the designated prayer. And now I like the way we do it now, because it makes it all of our prayers. And, my heart just sings when, a couple of weeks ago when, who was it, announced a birth.
Yes.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Great job, Zach's.
oh yeah, Zach Lane,
Yeah.
Betty Wormston's great grandson and a granddaughter.
What do you do? We all love
And,
it.
and everybody, clapped, and I see clapping as an act of faith. It's saying, it's sort of like saying, praise God for this blessing. And, I see it all the time when somebody announces, some sadness. And I see the person sitting in the pew behind them, leaning forward and gently putting their hand on the shoulder. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. And, talk about being conformed, do not be conformed to this world, okay? What we see a lot of is when someone is rejoicing or is blessed, there are people who say, oh, I should have gotten that promotion. Or, oh, the only reason why that person succeeded is, she's the boss's daughter, or, things like that. And, the other thing that, weep with those who weep, the saying that says, don't share your troubles with people. And it's because half of them don't care and the other half probably figure you had it coming to you. That's not the way it's supposed to work. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. This one of the things that I find amazing about Elizabeth. When Mary comes to her and says, I'm going to have a child, it's going to be the Messiah. In the so-called real world, what happens is Elizabeth says, who do you think you are? I've been waiting for a long time to have a child and I'm finally getting it. And you got to come in and upstage me like that. No, Elizabeth rejoices and said, blessed are you among women. That's not the way it works in the so-called real world. And what Paul is defining here is a different way of relating to each other. And that is, it's a challenge, when somebody starts yelling at you, what is the hardest thing not to do? Yell it back. Yep, exactly. And see, I think, when we work on our faith, it increases the possibility that that's what we will do, is that we'll step, back, okay? And what's the saying, before you get angry, count to 10? Yeah. In the real world, you know what that means? count to 10, it'll give you more time to think of a better insult.
Well, and along with what you were saying, one thing for experiencing, I think you would see it too. What you were saying, the good thing that you see in church and the sharing energy,
Yeah.
you get that when you go for women's retreats. You
Oh,
get
yeah, when you had the women's.
retreats,
Mhm.
that you really get a lot out of them. We haven't done one in a long.
Yeah, that would be
People
something that we
share,
nice.
people-
You're right, I
and-
remember,
and
yeah.
It's nothing like, and you know this, it's nothing like spending a day or two having meals, sleeping,
Mhm. Yep,
talking in the
yep.
night.
And that's what happened on the mission trips.
Yeah.
Is you
Oh, yeah.
experience a sense of community.
Yes.
You know, and as you were talking, it reminded me of something that a teenager said to me when I was at my first church in Maine. And, you know, we would go on youth retreats, and this church had a huge youth group. I mean, we had like 40 high school kids in this youth group, and we'd go on a retreat. And one of the things that a few of them did was they were part of what was known as the 48-hour club, which was they were going to stay awake the whole weekend. And, you know, I said, just as long as you behave yourselves, I'm going to bed. So anyways, when we would come back from retreats, you know, some of them wouldn't go to school on Monday. And then I got thinking, you know, maybe this 48-hour thing isn't such a good idea. And so I was talking to a couple of the youth about this, and you know, thinking, you know, if you're going to stay up 48 hours and you can't go to school on Monday, maybe this isn't a good thing. And the person looked at me and they said, that's not why we don't go to school on Monday. And I said, why? I'm getting teared up because they said, because we can't, when we go back to school, we can't relate to each other the way we relate to each other
Yeah.
on retreat.
Yeah.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah.
You know, that they have to be something different. And isn't it great that they have a place where they can come and, you know, experience what community is all, you know, about? You know, so what they were saying is that we have to decompress and prepare ourselves to go back to the real world. You know, that's sad. And, you know, that's what I'm saying when Paul says, do not be conformed to this world. There is a better way of life, an abundant way of life. So let's see, there was something else that I thought might catch people. Oh, in 2 Timothy, 2 Timothy 2, 1 through 26, and I'm specifically looking at verse 18, 1 Timothy chapter 2. No, wait, I'm wrong, Timothy. Wait, there's 2 Timothy. It's 2 Timothy.
First.
Yeah, chapter 2 and
Yeah.
verse 18.
Lots of chicks.
18, verse 18.
Yep. Oh, actually, let's start on well, let's read verse 14 to 19, and we'll go to my right. Yep. Oops. Yep. Take your time, Hazel. We're in 2 Timothy chapter 2, starting with verse 14.
Remind your people of this.
Yep.
And give them solemn warning in God's presence, not to fight over words. It does no good, but only ruins people who listen. 15.
That doesn't even.
15, yep.
I know.
That's why I have a
hard time following.
Sometimes, yeah.
Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth.
Avoiding empty and irreligious chatter. Those who indulge in it will stray farther and farther into godless ways.
Their teaching will spread like gangrene. Among them are
Hymenaeus,
Hymenaeus and
Philetus. Yep.
Who have swerved from the truth, saying that faith of some
keep going. You get to
Yep.
19.
That was,
that they
the-
didn't.
No,
that was
I
the,
think I'm good. No, this one.
Yep.
It's the all the way down.
you skipped the line.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah.
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 The resurrection has already happened there, of saying that faith of some.
But God's firm foundation stands, bearing the seal. The Lord knows those who are his, and let everyone whose names the name of the Lord depart from
Iniquity, yeah. So when I was reading that, what jumped out of the page at me is Paul actually names the troublemakers. You know, and I thought, ooh, you know, but maybe that's what he had to do, you know? There was somebody who was, two people who were creating a real problem and he calls them out. And sometimes that's what love does, you know?
See, I would have been looking at him and going, so who are these guys? Who?
You know, I can remember when I was a kid, and I grew up in a congregational church in the 1960s, and it was the civil rights movement, and it was the Vietnam War. And we had a minister who was very much in favor of civil rights and very much opposed to the Vietnam War. And that created some real nastiness in the church. I can remember being, you know, we call it the vestry, and an annual meeting. And, you know, it was, and this is because this making me think of what's going on here, you know, this tension and all this stuff. And the church had a parsonage, but it's kind of like the situation we had. There was an old parsonage, it needed work on it. And so they had to decide if they were going to buy a new parsonage. And there was a new development going in town and nice house. And they could get it for $40,000, brand new, $40,000. And there were people in the meeting who were just downright nasty. And there was no way that they were going to vote for a new parsonage. Not because they didn't think it was best for the church. They just didn't want this minister they didn't like to have a new parsonage, you know? And so, you know, I think about that and, you know, I can say, okay, you know what? So I see why Paul may be calling them out. You know, oh my gosh. And I can remember saying, coming home from church one day and asking my father, why do people get so angry with Reverend Sin? And my father said, because people come to the church not to be challenged, but to be comforted, you know? And I don't, you know, I don't want a faith, I don't want a faith that just leaves me feeling good all the time. I want a faith, and I will say that there are times, oh, stop it. It rings in my ear and scares me, the Bluetooth. You know, I want a faith that pushes me outside of my comfort zones in terms of what I believe in. Now, I will say that over my journey, faith journey, I have changed my opinion on various beliefs and attitudes toward things because, you know, what I think, what I've always believed comes smack up against something that says, you're sure about that? You know, Mark Twain once said, if you can't remember the last time you changed your mind, pinch yourself because you might be dead. He also said, you know, every once in a while, we should take out our brains and jump up and down on it, you know, to keep them pliable. And, you know, yeah, that's the kind of faith I want. I've told the story, and, you know, this is the church at its worst. And, you know, Paul's dealing with that. He had to deal with that various times. And I can remember the same minister, and I'll clean it up a little bit. So the church was having every member canvass, which basically meant that there was a certain day when people in the church who had been trained went out to every house in the congregation to receive that person's pledge for the coming year. And I can remember it was a fall day. It was, I just remember it being, beautiful, and the leaves were turning and everything. And my father pulled up to this house and he went over to the gentleman who was he and his wife lived there. And I remember he was up on a ladder doing something. And my father told him who he was and why he was there. And that guy came down off of that ladder like a shot, chased my father out of the yard and said, do not come back don't come back here looking for money until you get rid of that GDN loving minister. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I always say, the church is not man-made, it's God-given, because if it was just man-made, we would have driven it into the ground a long time ago. But that was the
What a shock for you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, to this day, I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I thought, wow, so is this what it means when we sing, Lord, I want to be like Jesus? And again, I want a faith that challenges me, and I want a Jesus who pushes me outside my comfort zone. And, if you look at his ministry, he was doing that over and over again. He was pushing, and he could call it like it was. We're going to see that in the sermon Sunday, the scripture reading, where the disciples are in the boat and it starts to sink, and they go to the back of the boat and they say, Lord, do you not care that he's sleeping, do you not care that we are perishing? And I think, what a question to ask. I mean, hey, Peter, Paul, all of you, not Paul, but are you serious? You're really asking if he cares, and Jesus gets angry with him, and so yeah, I want a Jesus that's, let me put it this way, I'm okay with a Jesus who gets angry with me and with us. So, let me see. Oh, let's look at James, because this is the one that I said that some people think that he's in conflict with Paul. So let's look at this and how we doing on time. Oh, we got a few more minutes. Maybe this is where we'll. And by the way, the other verse I'll point out, we won't jump into it, but 1 John 4, 7 through 21. Verse 18 is one of my favorites. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love casts out fear. Oh no, I'm referencing something else. We're in James chapter 2. Perfect love casts out fear. What's that?
I say there's not a lot of chapters.
Yeah.
Okay, chapter,
Very short.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yep. So let me get to James Titus.
It's right after.
Way.
Yes, it is. All right.
Easy to go by.
So
Yeah, so they-
starting verse 14. So we left off with you, Melissa. We'll go and read here.
We starting on verse
14. Chapter 2, verse 14. Yep.
What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him?
If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food,
What good is there in your saying to them, God bless you, keep warm and eat well, if you don't give them the necessities of life? 17.
Really.
Yep.
The necessities of life.
I'm gonna read what you were supposed to read. So faith by itself, if it has no works, is good.
Mhm.
Doesn't use any.
So now are we at 17?
Now we're on
Oh,
18.
Someone may say one chooses faith and another action, to which I reply, show me this faith you speak of with no actions to prove it, while I by my actions will prove to you my faith.
You believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder.
Do you want to be shown, you foolish person? And faith apart from works is useless.
Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar?
You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works.
And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God.
You see then that it is by his actions that a person is put right with God, and not by his faith alone.
And in the same way was not also Rahab the harlot justified by works when she received the messengers and went and sent them out another way.
As the body is dead when there is no breath left in it, so faith, divorced from action, is dead.
Okay, so what do you think Paul is getting at here?
James,
I'm sorry?
what is James getting at?
Oh, it's yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about
I
that.
don't know, James.
I had a feeling that would be the. Absolutely, absolutely. So are James and Paul contradicting each other?
Like, I agree with what you were
Yeah.
saying earlier. I don't think they're contradicting.
I don't think so either.
I think Paul focuses more on the faith, but I
Yeah.
don't think he's saying that.
That's right. They're accenting different syllables of the same word, you know? It's not, and this is one of the other things that we get ourselves into trouble today is, so often people go the either or route.
Yeah.
And sometimes things can be both and. I had a Catholic sister, nun, who once said something to me that I thought was incredibly profound. And at first glance, you think, that doesn't make any sense. She said, they say that the opposite of a truth is a lie. But the opposite of a great truth is another great truth. I can see you all trying to wrap your.
You said this, like.
I said this
you
to you,
said this, like,
yeah,
at the beginning of
months
the year.
ago,
Thanks
yeah.
for remembering.
Yeah, so basically what she means is that, we live in a society where it's either or, okay? If I'm right, that means you have to be wrong, okay? But a lot of times it's both and, okay? So if in an either or world, and there are some churches, some denominations, some faiths that will say this, if I say ministers men make good ministers, that means women make bad ministers or shouldn't be ministers at all. By the way, you want to share with them the exciting news?
Oh, but well, didn't it come out in the Hilltop?
Did it come out in the Hilltop?
News?
Yes, it
Yeah,
did. I'm
but
sorry. Yeah.
Gail was able to move on, and now she's like down to the last.
Yeah,
Yeah. So she had her ordination interview, the last step with the Committee on Ministry, which I am on now. And that's the group that oversees people who are in the ordination process. And they meet by Zoom, which I hate, but anyways. It's the last step before an ecclesiastical council. I'll mention what that's in a second. But anyways, before we welcomed Gail in, they're kept in what's called a breakout room. And it's all in Zoom, and then they're brought in. And Melissa was there as part of her indiscernment ministry, and also Michelle McDonald. Before they let you in, Tom Hathaway, who is the chairperson of the committee, and we'd had a tough interview right before this. And he said, I think this next one we'll all agree is a slam dunk unless she says something completely outlandish. And so Gail came in and she presented, we should, and I asked her about this and she said she was fine with it. So she basically created a website.
She did amazing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I was blown away. And it has her theology, it has marks of ministry, and she gives examples of it, links to YouTube videos of the worship service and this and that. And it was just amazing. And so after she did her presentation, she went back into the breakout room, and everybody on the committee was just saying that she was one of the best candidates they had seen come through in a number of years. And so they unanimously and enthusiastically recommended her for an ordination. Ecclesiastical council, which basically in our polity, you have to, the last step before you can be ordained is you have ministers and lay people from the churches in your association come together. It used to be you read your ordination paper. Now you present this portfolio. And then you vote. And then what they do is they say, we approve you, so you can circulate your profile. And when we approve you for an ordination pending an ordainable call. Well, she's not gonna have the surge because she wants to, stay here, but yeah, it was just amazing. But there are some churches, denominations that, you can't be, there's no such thing as a female minister,
Still?
Oh, yeah,
Really?
Southern Baptists,
Oh, wow.
some Episcopals
Mm.
churches, definitely the Catholic Church.
Mm.
The argument I hear is that if Jesus wanted women to be ordained, he would have had a few women among the 12 disciples.
Isn't there a thing about maybe one of the disciples was a woman?
Not so much as a woman, but yeah, that's Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's that? Da Vinci in his Last Supper and everything. But here's the thing. The best answer I heard to that was, if what you're saying is true, then what that means is that I'll just use the Catholic Church. Catholic Church should only be ordaining Jewish men with beards, because that's all 12 of them were Jewish men with beards. And so there's the opposite of great truth is another great truth. Men can make great ministers. Women can make great ministers. One of the problems we get ourselves into in this society is now it's either or, okay? If I'm right, you have to be wrong, okay? That's why the picture, if you look at it one way, it's a young woman. If you look at it another way, it's an old woman. So when I do an inquirers gathering, I always end with that. And some people, they'll quickly see both, others will see one. I'll say, well, they're both there. I said, help each other find them. And invariably what will happen is, as they're saying, well, this is the necklace that the young woman's wearing is actually the elderly woman's mouth and everything. And all they say, oh, I see it now. And that to me is the metaphor of the faith journey. No one can see all of God's truth. If we use this picture as a metaphor for God's truth, no one can see all of God's truth. And that's why we have to listen to each other, because you may be seeing a part of the truth that I'm not seeing, and, vice versa. And, I love those aha moments, because it's like, okay, I'm seeing something I didn't see before. And the ultimate example of this is many, many years ago, I shared this picture during a children's message. And I said to the children, what do you see? And all of a sudden this little boy said, I see a doggy.
A doggy?
Yeah, he says, I see a doggy. And I said, you do? Well, if you remember the picture, they're wearing like a fur collar, and there are all of these squiggly marks to kind of represent the fur and everything. And if you look closely, there's one little section where it looks like there's this little poodle with two paws crawling up, and I thought, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's seeing something that I didn't see, and that's why you gotta love those kids, although I always tell our student ministers, you never ask a question during a children's message unless you're sure you're gonna get the answer that you want. Even then, you gotta be prepared. And if you remember the children's message Joel gave where he got himself into all kinds of trouble, Joel Greenfield. Yeah, so he was doing a children's message on Lent and helping the children understand what Lent was. And he used the image of losing a tooth. And he says, you know, Lent is kind of like losing a tooth. You know, we get rid of bad habits to replace them with new good habits. Fine, but then he took it one step
Too far.
far. He wanted to convey the message that change can be scary. And so he said, you know, just before that tooth comes out, what does it feel like? And instead of saying scary, this kid raised his hand and says, it feels like $5.